Hello, everybody. Yeah, that song was by a gal named Tina Malia, and it was called Silent Awakening. I thought it would be appropriate with what I've got to share today. I like that expression, a silent awakening. A silent awakening. Just like it was all just a dream. That's all it was. No bells, no whistles, no fireworks, no banners. When we wake up, it's the way the sun rises. The sun rises. It doesn't have a parade go before it. It doesn't blow a trumpet. It just rises and lights up the whole world, And when we wake up, it's like that. All of a sudden, we just simply see. We just simply hear. We just simply feel. We just simply find ourselves right where we are. It's a silent awakening. It's a wonderful thing. An awesome thing. And the air smells fresh, the grass looks greener when we come back to life, when we resurrect, when we wake up. It's a silent awakening. Noise is what wakes us up many times. But what we wake up to isn't the noise. What we wake up to is the silence, is the stillness. It's the perfect peace. It's the joy, it's the light that we are. An old adage, an ancient proverb says that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and knowledge of the Holy One is understanding. And if we look deeply, we see that the fear of the Lord isn't fear. That's not what they're talking about here. It's a reverence, an awe that just takes over all of our attention. It just overwhelms our heart and soul. It doesn't overpower it. It just washes over it. It draws us out of the egoic power. It just captures our complete attention. And it's that awe, that reverence, from where wisdom springs forth. And the awareness of the Holy One, said the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Knowledge of the Holy One is understanding. It's the awareness, not a knowing about, not something you can read in a book or go to school and learn, but an awareness, a consciousness of being one with the Holy One. Yeah. That's understanding. That's wisdom. So there's this silent, still awareness in which wisdom grows. And it's in the silence that we hear. And it's in the stillness that we see. It's in the silence that we hear. And it's in the stillness that we see things as they truly are. Many of us can recollect the early years of our life, and when we were in a place called kindergarten, or maybe for some it's called preschool, or when you were brought into a classroom, one of the first things that they taught us was to be still, to stay seated, to be silent, to listen. And these things are essential. Because they are the soil from which true learning comes. Without their presence there, we're not really maturing. You know, it's the stillness, it's the silence that are essential for maturity and growth. You know, yeah. And a mark of maturity is equanimity. And equanimity is like a fruit of our practice, or practice of what some would call meditation, of what others would call being still, or being at peace, or being one with everything. It's a fruit of that. It comes out of that. Silence is the soil in which life seasons us. And apart from it, we cannot mature. Well, we cannot mature apart from spending time in silence. Silence in the midst of adversity. You know, yeah. Not reacting, not jumping to conclusions, not losing our cool, but simply resting in the silence. The adversity loses its sting. It loses its bite. And we may have troubles. Yeah, we will. That's part of being in the world, right? We'll have troubles, but we won't be troubled by our troubles. We'll have troubles, yeah, but we won't be troubled by our troubles. The seas will still have storms. The waves will still rise and fall, and the lightning flash and the wind blow. But inside, we can remain a quiet, still pool of serenity, of peace, of stillness, of silence, in the middle of all that. Recall what Jesus said in the Gospels. He said, "In this world you will have tribulation, but let not your hearts be troubled." He said, "In this world you will have tribulation, but let not your hearts be troubled." So we have a promise here. We have a promise of tribulation, of trouble. Jesus is saying, if I can promise you one thing, is that in this world you will have trouble. But he said, don't let your hearts be troubled. Don't let your hearts be troubled. Don't let your hearts be troubled. That's what he says to us. Jesus says to us, don't let your hearts be troubled. Especially in the times we're in. Especially in the generation that we're in. Don't let your hearts be troubled. Don't let your hearts be troubled by the wars and the famines and the political scene and the economy and none of that. Don't let your heart be troubled. Don't let your heart be troubled. He said, in this world you will have tribulation, but don't let your heart be troubled. The first part is promise of tribulation. And the second part is a word of admonition, an order of sorts, a command of sorts. He looks and he says, don't let your heart be troubled. You don't let your heart be troubled. As if your heart is your responsibility. The state of your heart, the state of your heart is like your responsibility. Because what's going to be here, fear will be here, and peace will be here. And this isn't about a struggle with fear at all. It's not about that at all. Not at all. This isn't about being courageous. This isn't about fighting fear and going on anyway. This is about being fearless. Because there's no fear in love. So our heart is like our deal, our responsibility. The state of our heart, it's up to us to maintain the state of our heart. And what do we do to maintain our peace? Do we fight fear? Do we resist it? Do we struggle? You'll never maintain peace by fighting anything, by struggling with anything. You can't fight for peace. It just doesn't work that way. It just doesn't work that way. You can't fight for peace. No, you can't. But what you can do is surrender to the peace. You can surrender your heart to the silence. You can surrender your heart to the stillness. So it's not about a resistance to fear. It's about a submission to the peace, to the love. It's not a fight, it's a surrender. Who you surrender to will be your master. You can surrender to the peace and maintain the peace of your heart like that, or if you give place to the fear, if you surrender yourself to it, then then the trouble makes its way into you, inside of you. But there's this peace that's present right now, that's here right now, that is way beyond rationale, that is totally out way beyond our beliefs. There's this fathomless, deep peace that goes deeper than any troubles we encounter. There's this peace that is a depth of our very being that is not touched by adversity. There's the stillness, the silence that goes deep, that's a depth in our being that doesn't get touched by the adversity. It's beyond rationale. It's beyond belief. Yeah, that's a place of real, true refuge. It's a place of refuge. It's a place of refuge because the adversity just can't go that deep. Because adversity itself is not that deep. Adversity has its limitations. Adversity has its boundaries. But this peace I speak of has no limitations, has no boundaries. It's fathomless. It goes very, very, very deep. If you want to be deep, if you want to have depth to your being, you have to go deep into the silence, into the stillness, into the light. Down there, be at that place that adversity just doesn't make its way into. That the confusion doesn't make its way into. The waves are on the surface of the ocean, but the depths are not troubled. They're quiet. They're still. And there's that depth of your being. Your emotions are on the surface. Your beliefs are on the surface. Your worries and cares are on the surface. But there's this depth to your very being that is untouched by adversity. And being still helps you realize that depth of your being. Being still expands your consciousness. If we look deeply and intentionally, we can actually sense the drawing power of emptiness, of silence, of stillness. We can sense that, the drawing power of it. It's sensed within oneself as a hunger. A hunger for the silence that's inside you. A hunger that can only be quenched by going inside, not by putting anything into you, nothing by anything you're going to bring to your mouth from the outside. It's not a hunger that can be quenched like that. You have to taste and eat of your own being. Yeah. You have to eat you have to eat what is inside. You have to eat of the peace. But that emptiness, that silence, there's this hunger that the heart has for that emptiness, for that silence, for that stillness. And we find ourselves drawn into that emptiness, that silence, that stillness, in the same manner that water is drawn to the lowest places. Well, we have this desire to flow into the void, to flow into the vacuum, to flow into the emptiness. There's this hunger for it, this desire to flow into it. And the ego fears that. But the heart knows it as being home. This isn't a drive, it's not a compulsion. Drives and compulsions, they come out of the egoic nature. But this isn't a drive or a compulsion. It isn't that kind of a hunger. It's nothing that we would eat in haste. But this is a longing, a hunger, a longing, a drawing to be in a state of belonging. To be in a state of belonging. It's a longing, a hunger to simply be. It's a desire to simply be. Just to be. And we can only find that belonging in the silence, in the stillness. Saint Paul of the Bible, wrote a letter to the Hebrews, to that part of the body, and he said this. He said, anyone who lives on milk, being still an infant, is not acquainted with the teaching about righteousness. But solid food is for the mature, who by constant use have trained themselves to distinguish good from evil. Solid food. Solid food. The to eat from the depths of your being. That's what's real. That's what's solid. That's what's real. That's what's solid. And that's for the mature. Who are the mature? It's those who by constant use have trained themselves to distinguish between good and evil. Another translation says, exercise their senses to discern. Exercise their senses to discern. And this exercise of the senses isn't about seeking to sense anything. It's simply about coming to our senses. It's simply about letting ourselves become sensitive. It's not seeking out the sensational. It's not seeking out the next best teaching, the next best doctrine, the next best guru. It's not about that. This maturity that I'm talking about comes from exercising our senses to awaken our sensitivity, to awaken our sensitivity. And he says here, who by constant use have trained themselves to distinguish between good and evil. Who have exercised their senses to discern. This discerning of good and evil is not about pronouncing judgment. It's not about sticking labels on things. It's not about taking your finger and pointing and saying, that's good, that's bad, this is good, that's bad. It isn't about that. No, it's not about that at all. This is about discernment. It's not about judgment. This is about discernment. It's not about judgment. It's not about pronouncing judgment. Can you see that? Can you see that there's a a difference between discernment and pronouncing judgment on things? Because that's what St. Paul here is talking about. He's not talking about pronouncing judgment and throwing the labels of good and evil on things. He's talking about discernment. Mature people are not people that judge things as good and bad, but rather to discern. And there is a difference. Discernment is about sensing the rightness, not the wrongness. It's about sensing the rightness. It's about following the gut, that inner voice. Discernment is about knowing when to be still and stay put or when to move on. It's about knowing whether it's the right time to say something or whether we should just be still and quiet in the flow of love itself. We read in the book of Ecclesiastes that there is a season. There is a time to speak and there's a time to refrain from speaking. So there's this right time to speak. And there's a wrong time that speaking shouldn't be done. And discernment is, much of it is about timing. About timing, right? Yeah. We look at a car, and a car that is timed right runs well. But a car that's out of time, out of synchronicity, doesn't run well. And so this discernment is about flowing well in synchronicity with life, itself. And St. Paul told us that those that are mature, by reason of use, have exercised their senses to discern, to flow well. So you find that a mark of maturity is the capacity to speak in a timely manner, to speak that which is appropriate, to do that which is appropriate in time, in sync with life. And that, my friend, is what sound doctrine about righteousness brings to us. Sensitivity to being in sync, in time with life. Submitted to the love and the loving places that love plants us. This exercise of our senses is an exercise of being still, being silent. It's an exercise of submission to the peace. Because sometimes that's what the peace requires of us. It's just silence. It's just stillness. Just to lay our tools down. Just to lay our sword down. Just to lay our words down, our beliefs down. Not to struggle, just to submit ourselves to the stillness and the silence. This maturity that I speak of, it's about being still and being silent when the ego doesn't want to. This is about a matter of obedience to an inner whisper. It's about a practice that develops within us this posture, this stance of submission to life itself, to God. Not to be at odds with it, in opposition to it. Not to be at odds or opposition to what it is. But this practice that brings us to maturity, of being still, of being silent. What it does is it develops our spiritual ears so that we can hear readily and precisely. The ability to hear readily and precisely comes out of that pristine, pure, unadulterated stillness, silence, and peace. Yeah. The practice of being still takes our eyes, it takes our ears, and it makes them focused. We become aware of intimate detail. And at the same time, we're not caught up in that. We're able, it gives us the space to see the whole picture. Both the intimate detail and the whole picture. And from that consciousness, from that awareness, from that seeing of the whole picture, we find ourselves able to speak skillfully, to respond skillfully in submission to that grace inside us. The grace inside us that we awaken to through the practice. Through the practice. One of the things that we find is as we start to mature, that we lose our taste for entertainment, as far as to entertain ourselves with things outside of ourselves. We lose the compulsion to entertain ourselves with things outside of ourselves. As we mature, we don't need the entertainment. We just find that we don't need it no more. Now the ego, it doesn't like to sit quietly. It doesn't like to meditate. And that's easy to see, isn't it? As soon as we sit for any amount of time in silence and stillness, we'll quite quickly discover a variety of diverse voices that will call us away from it, that will demand our attention, that seek to drive us out of the stillness and the silence that feeds our hearts. Because the ego opposes the nature of the heart, the true nature of stillness and silence. The ego sees the silence, sees the stillness as a threat. It fears it. When our will is turned over to God, when our will is turned over to the stillness, to the silence, to the light, to the life that is here in this moment, it disempowers the ego. Because the ego's always out there trying to make a living, trying to make something happen, trying to play God and bring things into being that are not there. But try as it may, the ego cannot resist the silence. It will try. Don't get me wrong. It will try to resist the silence. All you need to do is sit still. Try to sit still and see how many times you can breathe before the voices come. It's not long at all. The ego will resist the silence. That will happen. But it can't do it. It's trying to do what it can't, because in order for it to resist the silence would have to resist it. And because the silence does not resist the ego, because the silence does not resist the ego, it cannot be resisted. And the silence sucks the power right out of the ego. And the ego goes out screaming and crying and making demands for our attention. The ego will tell you that it's a waste of your time. A waste of your time. To sit in silence, to sit in stillness. To just be without doing anything. The ego will try to drive you crazy with its nagging to get up and to do something. Just to get up and do something, anything, besides just be. And this is where a lot of people, they stop there. They go into their meditation. They go into the practice. They sit. They resolve themselves to sit still in stillness and silence. But then the ego raises its voice, and it starts nagging them to do something. And what we do many times is we treat it like we would a kid that's screaming for candy. We just give it what it wants to, just to shut it up. and we get up and we do something. And step out of that peace and that silence. It's like we've heard before, the mind is a great servant but a poor master. And we spoil our ego like a little kid, and we just give it whatever it wants, whatever it screams for. And the more we feed it, the more demanding it gets. You ever notice that? The more you just give the ego what it wants to, whatever it cries out for, it doesn't satiate the hunger. It doesn't quiet it down. It just gets more demanding. It just gets more violent. It just gets more forceful. Because feeding desire will only promote it. Take the heroin addict. He takes a shot. He puts the needle in his arm. He gives the addiction what it wants, but does the addiction go away? Every time he shoots up, he just becomes more addicted. Desire, giving the ego what it wants may get it to be quiet for a moment, but in the end, it's only feeding it. And much of what we do, Zach asked, does meditation silence the ego? I have found that it doesn't necessarily do that. The ego resists it. The ego doesn't like meditation. It screams all the louder. But we don't want to give in to that, We don't. But we do, don't we? We do. We get up from our meditation and go flip on the TV and crank up the music or get busy doing something. we recreate the present moment to silence the voice of the ego. We seek entertainment. We seek recreation. But when we recreate, what's formed is an illusion. It's not what was really there. And why do we recreate? Why do we recreate? Why do we seek entertainment? Because entertainment with things outside of ourselves. Why do we do that? It's because we sense a discontentment with what's here in this moment. We're discontent with the simplicity of life as it is right now. And who's discontent? Well, that's what you discover in silence, is if you'll stay seated and not get up and turn on the TV and crank up the music or go get something to eat or get busy into something, if you'll listen to the ego scream, yet stay seated and just watch, you'll soon find out that it's the ego that is discontent. It's not you. It's not you. Who you really are does not get discontent. Who you really are is completely complete. Who you really are is full and alive and vibrant and life itself. Who you really are could never be discontent. It's the ego that gets discontent. So if we want to grow spiritually, if we want to mature, it's not a matter of going out and buying the next best spiritual teaching from the next best guru. It isn't that at all. That isn't how we mature. We don't mature by listening to tons of speakers. We don't mature that way. I'm not downing them. I'm not downing them at all, but there's so many that are ever learning and ever coming to an awareness of the truth that they are, because they're always looking for it in the next teaching, rather than getting quiet in sitting and going through that dark night of the soul, going through that and discovering who they really are by spending time in the silence, in the quietness. You grow rooted in that by spending time there. You can only grow your roots into being by spending time there. Take the seed out of the soil and it's never going to grow roots. You have to spend time in the silence, in the stillness, if you want to grow to be that. You have to. There's just no other way around it. I wish I could tell you there's a quick way. I wish I could tell you there's a convenient way. I wish I could tell you that there's an easy way, but there's not. The silence, the stillness is the way. It is the way. It itself is the way. And I'm not on some kind of a mission. It isn't that I have an agenda, that I'm trying to convince people it's wrong to watch television or listen to music or other things like that. No. What I'm trying to get across is that those things simply cannot be substitutes for the practice and the discipline of silence that it takes to mature. You won't grow strong on junk food. You'll get obese. You'll get puffed up. Reading a bunch of teachings, listening to many teachers is not the same thing as being still. It's not the same thing as being silent. And it takes stillness, it takes silence to digest and transmute what you do here into true wisdom. The teaching is not digested when we simply keep pouring it down our throats, not ever giving ourselves the time and space to actually become it. Well, you've heard it said, you are what you eat. But I'd say unto you, you are what you eat and digest. The heart needs the stillness. It needs the silence. It needs the time to digest what you hear. And what happens when we just simply take in a bunch of teaching without spending time in quiet, in the stillness and the silence, and digesting what we hear, we just grow fat. Sugar that's put into the body that's not burnt up turns into fat. And knowledge that's put into your spiritual body that's not put into practice turns into spiritual fat. Then people become vain. They start to think they know. They grow this spiritual belly. And they get this idea that I know something. And then they start defending that knowledge of the truth. Well, and rather than gaining an ear to actually hear it and apply it, they find themselves defending it, you know? But a good and a noble heart, an ear to hear, an eye to see, those things come out of the practice of submission to the stillness and the silence. So we have to be willing to sit with our boredom and to sit with our discontentment and let Let the boredom and the discontentment entertain you, so to speak. Observe it. Get to know it in an intimate way. So intimately that you know that it's not who you are. See, we talk a lot about the ego. We talk a lot about it. We study it intensely. We put it under a microscope. We try to figure it all out. But to know the difference between the ego and who you really are, you got to be quiet. You got to be still. Because seeing the ego comes from that position of being still. You don't see the ego when you're all wrapped up in it. You have to stand back. You have to see it from a distance. And there's a difference between knowing a lot about the ego by taking in a bunch of spiritual teachings and actually knowing the ego, having tea with it. It ain't going anywhere. It ain't going anywhere anytime soon. I think you'll find it sticks to you like your shadow. If you're honest. But do we need to resist our shadow? We can simply just let it be and know that it's not who we are. We can live with it. We can live with our egos and know that it's simply not who we are. It's like a shadow that follows us. Earlier I was talking about how St. Paul said, by reason of use, they have exercised their senses to discern between good and evil, you know. By reason of use. By reason of use. So by this practice of resting in this quiet awareness, by reason of use, what happens is we begin to acquire and develop a taste for truth, for reality. We begin we get a second sense for it. It's an acquired taste that comes by the reason of use, through the practice. Consider how people acquire a taste for whiskey. I can relate to this because I was one of those. But when I first drank whiskey, to be honest with you, it tasted pretty bad. It didn't go down easy. It was harsh. But by reason of use, I acquired a taste for it. And it wasn't too long before I could tilt a bottle of Jack Daniels upside down and just gulp it. Once I acquired that taste for it by reason of use. And stillness and silence will taste harsh to the ego. That's just the way it is. That's just the way it is. When you first enter into this practice, the stillness will seem scary. The silence will scare, may even frighten you. Because what happens is in the silence and in the stillness, in the light, you start to see, you start to hear, you start to feel all those things that you didn't want to. So it tastes pretty bad at first glance. When you on a hot summer day in an ice cold lake, you stick the first foot in and it's pretty cold. But once you're in the water, once you're settled in, and once you've acclimated your body to it, it's wonderful. And that's the way that this practice of stillness and silence is. It's a little hard to get into. It's a little hard to get into, but once you've spent time in it, once you've practiced it, by reason of use, you develop you acquire a taste for it, and it's just wonderful. Then after you've been there a while, you wouldn't even think of flipping the TV on. You'd much rather sit. You'd much rather meditate. You'd much rather just be and just breathe and just feel the breath coming in and out and just sense the aliveness. You find that all of a sudden your hunger for all the teachings dissipates. Because you found what you're looking for inside the stillness and inside the silence. And when you find what you're looking for and you know what you have found, you stop looking. You stop seeking. And the taste that you've acquired for it keeps you coming back to it. You don't seek things outside of it. The seeking for things outside of what truth is fails to allure you the way it used to. It fails to pull you away the way it used to. And there's many good things that come out of this practice, more than I have time today to expand upon. But one good thing that comes out of the practice I can bring to light is there's this posture, this stance of submission that comes through the discipline of the silence. It's a posture which puts you in a position to make connections that you normally wouldn't connect with. Take, for example, somebody standing at home plate with a baseball bat. You know? Picture that in your mind. Their posture puts them in a position to make the connection with the ball. The timing the synchronicity, are quite dependent upon that posture. If he lets his bat simply rest on the ground, the ball will fly right by him. He won't connect. He won't make the connection. But it's the posture, the position. He sits there silently just waiting. Kind of like a cat would watch a mouse hole. You just sit there waiting, silently, in stillness, just waiting, effortlessly, not in anticipation, not in apprehension, but just waiting. And then when the ball comes, it's a flow of grace. It's a flow of grace. And you connect with the ball. And you knock it clean out of the stadium, man. You begin to hit home runs in life. You begin to connect with the things that soar right past everybody else's heads that they don't even see. They don't even see this stuff coming. But when you're in sync, when you're in time, when you're in that position of just quiet rest and waiting and that stillness and that silence, somebody will come up to you with a strong ego, for example, and decide on having a episode of road rage and invite you to participate. If you're in that position of waiting, that you can see it coming, and you won't just react. You won't just jump into the fight. You'll see it for what it really is. And then you just decide that what the piece requires of me is silence. It's no big thing. I just don't entertain it. I just don't react to it. You know? The normal person that seeks entertainment, that seeks to bury himself in busyness and noise, will react. They'll jump right into that mess. So fast that you won't even blink an eye, and they'll be in it. And they'll be angry, and they'll be upset, and stress will flow through their body and cause them health issues and everything else. That's what the normal people do. Some groups call them earthlings. But if for the, and this is what Jesus said. He said, "There's few that find this way, few that find it. Many are called, but few are choosing to find it. You know, it's a narrow way, it's a straight way, it's a very simple way." It's stillness in the silence, you know? And when you're in that way of stillness and silence, you see, you hear, you feel. All of it. You don't miss out. Now the ego will tell you that when you're sitting in stillness and when you're silent, you're gonna miss out. You're going to miss out on watching the ball game. You're going to miss out on that next meal. You're going to go hungry. That's what the ego's going to tell you. But the truth is, you won't miss out on nothing. You'll find all the things that you've missed. You'll see, you'll hear, you'll feel all of it. You won't miss out on nothing. Your life will become fuller. Your heart will become fuller. Your eyes will become brighter. Now, this silence and this stillness that I'm talking about, it's not a forced silence. Let me put it that way. It's not a demanding the world to sit still. No, it's not demanding that the world sit still. It isn't requiring the world to be still and silent. Life requires us to be still and silent, not the world. You know? It's not about making demands on the world to be quiet, to be easy to live in. It's more about us submitting ourselves to our truest nature, to the stillness and the silence. Demanding silence is a manufactured silence. It's a manufactured silence. It's not real. It's not real. It's not real. You can take somebody and put duct tape over their mouth, but that won't make them quiet. All you have to do is see what's going on inside of them. The noise is still there. The duct tape's over their mouth, but their head is still turning, cranking out all kinds of stuff. Well, this isn't about manufacturing silence. It isn't about demanding it from others. It isn't demanding that the world stop. It isn't demanding that the world stop turning. The world running on, the world turning, the world running on isn't what lulls us to sleep. It isn't what puts us to sleep. It isn't what puts us in the dark. It's our running. It's our running, not the world's. And when we're on the run, we run right past things. And it's when we become still that we begin to see those things and notice things that we ran right past before. It's in the stillness that we gain awareness of the details that we missed. And when we start to see those details, it brings with it a deep sense of appreciation and gratitude. And suddenly we can appreciate the flower because we're able to smell it. We're there to smell it. We're not running past it. We experience greater appreciation for the food because we take the time to chew it and taste it. When we stop running, when we approach it from the stillness, from the silence, rather than on the run, and rather than in the noise. It's when we become still and stop moving, when we stop the running and we just stand still, then we notice that the world is moving around us. We see it turn. And as long as we were moving and running, we didn't see it. Do you see? We didn't see it. We didn't see it. We didn't see it turning. We didn't see it moving because we were in it. We were moving. We were running. And in our moving and our running, we didn't see the movement and the turning of the world. And the world turned out to be a pretty dead world because we just didn't see it happening. But when we're still, we notice the things moving around us. Stand beside the highway and watch the cars go by, you know. All of a sudden there's this flow, there's this traffic of life. And what was dead suddenly comes alive when we're still. The world around us comes to life. We begin to become aware of the flow. We begin to become aware of the things that are happening around us. And then life just happens. Then life just happens. It just happens. We don't try to make it happen. It just does. Because it was always happening. It never stopped happening. It's just that we did not happen to be still enough to see it, quiet enough to hear it. So one of the things you do find is, if you're committed and resolved to sit still and be quiet, is that the world that you will awaken to the world around you, and you will awaken within you the sense of awe and wonder. And you'll begin to actually perceive the synchronicity of all the things that flow around you and how everything is connected and in touch. And in sync. And you'll begin to see a higher order to everything and how nothing is really out of order. It's when we're hasty, when we're on the run, when we're busy, when we're in the noise, that the world seems disordered, that the world seems chaotic. And the more we try to hurry up and get, the more we try to hurry up and acquire, we find that the more we lose. In the chase to make a life, we lose touch with the life that's here. We don't see it. We don't hear it. We don't smell. We don't taste. We don't enjoy. The more we hurry up and try to get, the more we lose in our pursuit to obtain, trying to fulfill all the expectations and orders. We order the order. We make demands of the order. And we lose our sense of order. We lose our sense of rightness. We lose our sense of security. We find that outside the present moment, things do go awry, yet nothing is awry. Awryness is just an illusion. It's when we're still, when we're silent, that the waters around us become still. And we see it's all pristine, it's all perfect. Nothing's wrong. And we find that our perception of the wrongness, of the awryness, came from our seeing the world from the wrong position, the wrong posture, from a time-based position, rather than the eyes of eternity. We were in the car, in the traffic, rather than simply observing it. I'm going to take this moment. I just kind of got a nudge inside me to just say, to wrap it up right here. I could talk for hours on this. I could keep going, but there's a time to stop, and that time is now. So I'm gonna play a tune and end it. Just give me a minute to put something on.
I need to be still and let God love me. I need to be still and let God love me. When this old world starts to push and shove me, I need to be still and let God love me. I need to relax and let God take over. I need to relax and let God take over. He'll take this load off of my shoulders. I need to relax and let God take over. When there's trouble all around me and my soul cries out for rest, when I feel that I'm failing even though I've done my best, when decisions get so heavy and there are answers that I need, I know it's time to just be still and let God love me. I need to be still and let God love me. I need to be still and let God love me. When this whole world starts to push and shove me, I need to be still and let God love me. I need to be still and let God love me. I need to be still and let God love me. When this whole world starts to push and shove me, I need to be still and let God love me.
Okay, and Lynn, if you're here, I'll go ahead and turn the mic over to you. Hopefully you're here. If not, I'll keep playing music or do something. Anyway, here you go.